Okay, good morning. Call to order the Goochland County Board of Supervisors, January 22nd, 2020 meeting for the purpose of a joint session with the Goochland School Board to discuss the 21 to 25 capital improvement plan.
I will call us in with all of that. Thank you.
Well done.
All right, so, turn the meeting over to Mr. Badesky and Dr. Rayleigh.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Appreciate everyone taking the important time this morning to spend reviewing our capital improvement plans for collectively the county and the school system. One of the things I wanted to do out of respect that we have 5 new faces collectively that were not part of the joint meetings in prior years. Wanted to just step back a little bit and talk about the capital improvement plan. Often the boards will spend a great deal of your meeting time focusing on the operational sides of the budget, not to shortchange the capital improvement plan. But I wanted to spend a fair amount of time here this morning just making sure we all understand what's included, the process, and how we go about doing this. Ultimately, even though the school adopts a plan and recommendations, the county is charged with balancing those collective needs within our revenues and cash and those kinds of things. We'll talk more about that here today. That's a critical component of any plan. We also balance a 5-year capital improvement plan within guidance that's provided by the Board of Supervisors. So we will balance that over 5 years. The typical guidance that I've received over the years has been balanced within our existing tax rate, our existing debt capacities, and our cash capabilities to fund that. And we do that over a 5-year balance, but we actually only adopt annually the 1 year. Some of that is statute prohibits us from obligating future boards. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do our prudent work of planning for those kinds of things, and we do that on a 5-year basis. Approximately 2 years ago, Dr. Rayleigh and I, when we couldn't sleep one night, decided that it may be prudent to even do a 25-year capital improvement plan. I will tell you, up until that period of time, Goochland County, as well as the majority of all other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, only really did 5-year capital improvement plans. We had some pressures as we were dealing with growth projections and the collective county needs. We did a lot of study on the county side. We updated our public facilities plans. We updated our proper impact models. We, we've done traffic studies since then. The schools did the collective work of trying to look at school growth projections as well as facility needs. And so we did develop a 25-year capital improvement plan. Now, it is a plan, so everyone, if someone comes up to me in 2033 and says, back in 2020, you said you were building a library in 2023. That's why we go back each year and adopt the annual and the 5-year, because all good plans may change from the standpoint of different priorities come up, the economies could be different. We're looking at it through this lens of this 12 months and trying to do our best educated projections as we move forward. In fairness, some of those projections are just that from the standpoint of a planning. As you know, HVACs have life cycles. We always do our best to extend those. Roofs have life cycles. We do our best to extend those. And many other major operating systems of cost, we try to plan out. So if I'm opening a building today, and we did this, so down the road we opened a building with the new courthouse facility, I know that that HVAC for that unit has a 20-year lifespan. So in the capital improvement plan, you'll see that we projected out 20 years. That doesn't mean it's locked in stone, but we want to think long-term. And so what was happening, and I don't want to just in any way suggest that the 5-year wasn't a good planning document, but it wasn't inclusive. It wasn't recognizing that we had this cliff of needs that was falling behind the 5-year. Because we always had, and just like you at your homes and our residents in their homes, there's always more need potentially than the means that you have available. And so as we're balancing, there are projects that will be able to move within a 5-year window, and there are projects that had to be pushed out. And so we always kept a list of projects that we couldn't put in the 5-year balance. But now what we did was really try to project them out. We used some growth projections throughout the county in some of those assumptions. We used cost escalators in some of those assumptions. Obviously, a project today may cost more in 5 or 10 years, and so we had to take that into consideration. I always get the question from our residents of, you know, you're approving rooftops, but you're not thinking about the operational impact of the county. And when they give me the opportunity, I always share with them that's actually not completely accurate. We are trying to think about the impact, whether it be fire and rescue services, court services, school services collectively, and we do plan for it. And I think we've done fairly well with that. We are facing some challenges. Past improvements in the county, and they've served us very well, but a lot of times when you take on major infrastructure in one period of time, for instance, if you build 3 schools 50 years ago, there's a chance that those 3 schools outlive their useful life in a very similar time span. And that could be said for school buses or fire trucks and other kinds of facilities. One of the things that we always try to do when we're developing capital improvement plans is balance, or we call it smoothing, if you will, to make sure that we don't have these years of major need and we plan appropriately to tackle them. And so what projects are we really talking about? And usually in the operational side of the house, it's more of the day-to-day annual expenditures. Capital improvements fundamentally, and there's some deviation to this, is we're usually talking about projects over $50,000 and up in scope of cost, and that generally have a lifespan longer than 5 years. And so these are not just, I want to make a small improvement here or there that we tend to cover in our maintenance operational sides. We do include in some of our capital planning vehicle replacements, large-scale maintenance projects, as well as building replacements and the larger kinds of items. On the county side, we also include our large equipment, so fire and rescue. You'll see ladder trucks and fire trucks and ambulance and those kinds of things. We do try to consider those in that capital improvement plan. But one of the things you'll see in the planning documents here and that we've historically done is we also, even though it's in the capital improvement plan and over 50,000, we're also very cautious that we're not borrowing for those kinds of projects. And so if we can cash pay for an ambulance or cash pay for a fire truck, we're not using debt when at all possible. That's been a practice that we've been blessed to be able to maintain, at least during my tenure, and hope to be able to sustain in the long term. And so as we can, and we've been fortunate to be able to have the end of the year cash reserves to be able to fund the future year's capital improvement plan. Some other jurisdictions will budget right up front and become dependent on those funds. We have tended to fund our cash side of our capital improvement with the exception of some direct contributions that we're doing for debt service and those kinds of things with our cash. I think we are in a very envious position in many ways. I've served larger jurisdictions, and on a percentage basis, we really do a great job at cash funding the majority of our ongoing needs. That said, we have pressing large capital needs confronting us, and that is some of the context that we'll be discussing here with both boards today. You should know your staffs spend an awful lot of quality time together in the development of not only the operational side, but the capital improvement plan. To develop a 25-year capital improvement plan, I will say it takes, it's not just a staff effort, it takes some courage amongst the boards to adopt it. I've literally, in the years past, got caught up on adopting even an annual plan because someone wanted to dive in and decide, well, instead of buying Chevy pickups, we should buy Ford pickups. And that maybe merits discussion, but at the same time, multi-million-dollar utility projects would just move on through the pipeline, partly because it's easy when you're doing a capital improvement plan to lean on things that your experience and knowledge focuses on. I can relate to, I'm more of a Chevy guy.
For the record.
And so one of the things that I hope is of value to both boards is your staff's expertise and our work with, and many times we use consultants or on-call contractors and those kinds of things to help fundamentalize and professionalize the recommendations that you are seeing in this process. These are the recommendations of your professional staff. You as the policymakers make the ultimate decision. On the county side, we will have more quality time to get down into the individual line items of the capital improvement plan in the weeks and months to come, as we do each and every year. We will ultimately, hopefully, adopt in April not only the annual budget, but the 5-year plan and the 25-year capital improvement plan. What you're seeing today is fundamentally based upon what was built last year. So unless we missed something, and that is possible, or some priorities have changed, the basis of the capital improvement plan should not radically overhaul each and every year, with exception. The large projects will always drive any balanced 5-year capital improvement plan. And there are balanced needs of every community on both public education side and county operational sides, and that includes our public safety, which is our largest cost center on the county side. And so as we move into today's presentation, want to call some attention. There are more needs in our community than we can fund in a 5-year period using the parameters under which we have developed. My hope today is to have a robust discussion on that 5-year plan, because there is a criticality to making some decisions over the next few months that will really set in motion the plans for the next 5 years in this community. And there are some projects that are once in a lifetime kinds of projects that both boards in this room will be making decisions on behalf of your constituents. And most likely they will serve our grandchildren and potentially theirs. And so most of the projects that we do, especially the large scale projects, they're not just something that if you approve it in fiscal year 22, that we start in 22. We sort of back those projects up from a planning standpoint. If borrowings are included, we have to consider that. If on the county side we want to use our AAA bond rating, or 2 AAAs, a third, we have to factor in when do we go get a third. And so as your staff is planning these recommendations and placing recommendations into particular fiscal years on a plan, there's also a lot of thought to the efforts that have to occur prior to the actual project's commencement. Usually that's when I mean commencement, I'm talking more of the breaking of the ground, not the planning side of things. And so we've given some thought to that in the projects that we're going to roll out to you here today. The other thing that I think is a real area that we have to pay attention to is our ability to actually deliver these projects to our residents successfully. And what I mean by that is, as we look at particular projects in size and scope and the numbers of projects, while we may feel some of these projects all need to happen in the next 5 years, I think Dr. Raley and I really need to look on your behalf at our staff's capacities and say, can we actually, even if we had all the money for these, could we deliver them to our citizens as professionally and capably as we need to deliver them? And that sometimes guides whether or not they will be included in the 5-year priorities or not, and you're going to see some of that here today. I don't want to underestimate the importance of what I just said. We can take on a lot of projects, but success is what our residents expect, and we need to make sure that we have the resources. Some of these, when I say resources, it could be contract project management. that will assist us in capacities that neither of us may have on our staff. But it truly is project management at its most fundamental basis of, can we manage so many projects with the procurement processes that have to occur, provide the project oversight that's necessary, the financial management and accounting sides of all of these projects. And that level of effort should not be underestimated as we're considering any capital improvement plan, to be able to deliver positively. And so we're going to dive a little bit further into some projects here today. I do anticipate that this may be the first of many ongoing joint meetings, or a number of ongoing joint meetings, because there will be projects that you're going to hear that in what I will introduce on February 18th, the county administrator's recommended budget. That recommended budget will include some changes over the past year, not only on the operational side, but including the capital side. And I think this meeting is important because we wanted to prepare both boards for some of the changes in the capital improvement plan that we have had to make since the last adoption. That means that some projects will have had to move into the 5-year span, and some will have had to move out. And so, as I said earlier, it's critical that we are in concurrence on the 5-year piece of this. Once we reach that level of concurrence, I think there is a hearty discussion that has to occur amongst both boards at a policy level of what additional needs were we not able to accomplish in that 5-year window, and what potentially are our paths forward to address them. And I suggest that be a 2-step process, partly because we really need to be clear on our priorities in that 5-year window. If we start talking about a lot of projects that you're going to see in the plans that we'll share with you today that are beyond the 5-year, I think we're going to really lose sight on what it is that we're trying to accomplish in that 5-year window. Is there some flexibility? Can certain projects be moved in, out? That's a policy decision. Well, we'll make a staff recommendation to you. There is some flexibility to that. I will say there's also consequences. We brought you a plan. If you go through every line item in here, you can start wickering and say, well, let's extend that HVAC out to year 8, and let's extend that roof out to year 9. There is a risk in that equation, and in fact, some of these projects, by the nature of we get 4 years out, if that roof doesn't need replaced and we can extend it, we'll get moved at that point. But from a planning standpoint, to start moving projects out, we could probably free up, if you just made decisions purely in a vacuum without data, you can free up a couple $1 million to move to a project, but there's always a cost to moving those projects out. We think we've recommended to you, in what you have in front of you, what we believe are the priority needs in the next 5-year window. I will say, even if you did just what I said, that we're not recommending, you will not solve the bigger problem of the collective need that we have collectively identified amongst the schools in the county. And what I mean by that, there are projects that have been moved beyond the 5 years that $1 million or $2 million alone will not solve. I admit that all of us around here and our constituents would like to have an additional $1 million or $2 million, but we're talking about tens of millions of dollars of projects that will be moved around in the capital improvement plan collectively. And so, if you don't mind, we're going to sort of walk through a little bit of this process. It's not just Dr. Rayleigh and I. As you can see, we have collective staff surrounding us that are more expert in their particular areas of expertise that we can go through. I did not plan to spend as much time at the line item level here. The board will do that, the board supervisors will do that in one of your upcoming work sessions. We did, though, want to give you some context for what we believe are the large projects. And there's no surprise in this. Goochland Elementary has been one of our top priorities in the 5-year capital improvement plan. And then on the county side, we have court needs. And so I'm going to get into those here as well. but that there are many other projects and issues that we need to discuss as we move forward here. So let's talk a little bit about, on the county side, facility maintenance is our general services side. Most of what you're seeing in here, you got a couple $1 million years, a couple $300,000 to $500,000 years, is ongoing kinds of large-scale maintenance and improvements to particular facilities. On the county side, it should be noted, this is all county facilities. So with the exceptions of courts. And so all county facilities end up falling into this 5-year bucket. Courts we do look at as a separate functional category. Fire and rescue is also separate, as well as sheriff needs. But these are all of the county facility needs. For the Board of Supervisors and for the school board, just so you know, most of these projects are not new in here. These are projects that have been in our capital improvement plan in prior years. The detail for each one of these projects is included in the online version of the budgets. We're going to provide projects, the Board of Supervisors in your book that you'll get in a couple weeks will include the detail on every single project here. That is publicly available. The school board will have access to all of that as well. And at that time, it will also include all the full detail on all the schools projects. So you'll get, at the line item level, detail on every single one of these projects. And how we arrived at these, and the staff has prioritized them for you, but they're also prepared to help dive into the why this is a priority here and those kinds of things. And so facilities management, you can see really down at the bottom line, probably have just under $3 million investment in county collective facilities here over the next few years. Judicial administration. One of the things, I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. I know some of you may have not brought your microscope, but this document is really what we use to look at the 25-year capital improvement plan. Everything in green is balanced. What you're seeing here is what I've prepared and plan to introduce on February 18 in my collective rollout. It should be noted that this project is a change over last year's capital improvement plan. Last year's capital improvement plan, after the boards had met, and those that were on the school board at the time and others that were close to this know that the schools had introduced give or take $16 million of middle high school improvements in the capital improvement plan, and that was collectively in last year's adopted capital improvement plan. In that process, some of you may recall that I had shared with you that the judge had reached out to us, circuit court judge, and expressed concerns that the courthouse was moved out of priority order in the 5-year plan. One of the things, and Mr. Lumpkins helped with the meeting with the judge, one of our tasks on the county side after that was to go back and sort of quantify, are there additional interim investments that we can make on the county side that could extend the lives of the current courts facilities? Those of you that are familiar with the current courts facilities, you know we have an aged, while it's beautiful, it's just not as functional circuit court facility. General district court's in a different building. The security is not up to today's expected standards. In fact, we actually had a study from the state that declared our facilities out of compliance. And for many reasons. I don't get into some of the security details in these public meetings for obvious reasons, but there are issues from multiple avenues as it relates to the courts. As Mr. Stamey and the team from our space planning agency really started diving into how do we develop more secure corridors, prisoner transport, with sally ports, holding cells, all those kinds of things. Once we hit about $4 million, we stopped. It just did not make sense for us to look at making interim investments in a courthouse facility that quite honestly had no longer term useful life. And we ended up going back and looking at some capacities, that what could we tackle as it related to a courts facility. We do estimate that a new courts facility for Goochland County will cost in the range of $25 million. So that obviously begs the question, as you're looking at what's on the screen. I just told you that this would be my recommended addition or change from last year's capital improvement plan. You're only seeing, you know, just under 18 million collectively here, based on previous funding and what's in fiscal year 23 and 24. That is because I also was working in those parameters of available cash and debt to be able to use on projects. This means that just with what's here and being introduced, we will have to take a phased approach on the county side to address the court's needs. So what I mean by phased approach, we will have to build one building with the ability to expand to full operations with future available funding. And so it takes care of a substantial amount of the court's need, but it doesn't solve what we believe to be the collective county needs on courts. I plant this seed now because it'll come into context as we're looking at the bigger picture here, because I think that's important for you to understand. On the county side, while last year we did recognize and understand and agree with the importance of the needs for the middle high school, we also have to balance what we're introducing to take care of the county's needs in some capacity as well as the school needs. And you'll see we've made some changes on the school sides as we get into this discussion as we move a little further along. Fire and rescue. I'm sure the school board gets asked the same question. I get asked, what keeps you up at night in Goochland County? And public safety is that question answer for me. When we dial 911, do we have professional, capable people that can respond? And two, do they have the appropriate equipment, apparatus that our residents need and deserve to be taken care of properly? And so fire and rescue and the sheriff's department, their collective public safety needs are our top priorities. And on the county side, we had to also make some additional decisions on as it impacts fire and rescue as it relates to this 5-year plan. One of the things for the board to call out in particular, we did in our previous 5-year plan have a ladder truck planned beyond fiscal year 21. You will see one of the major changes is the ladder truck is brought into fiscal year 21 in this new 5-year plan. We've always identified it as a need. We have raised it in priority here. Partly, you know, we only have one ladder truck in the county. It sits centrally in Company 5 right now. We had to take our most recent previous ladder truck out of service due to its maintenance needs. This brings another one back in for the eastern side of our community that has growing demands of taller buildings and facilities, along with existing corporate headquarters and those kinds of things of multiple stories. And so this would actually bring a new ladder truck into our plan a little sooner than it would have otherwise. For the most part, the remainder of the remainder of the other equipment lines have not been changed dramatically. One glaring change on fire and rescue is that we did push West Creek Fire Station out to the years beyond fiscal year 25. And why did we do this on the county side? And you'll see the impacts to schools here in just a minute, but in order to bring and address some of our courthouse needs in, there had to be decisions that were made. And on the county side, we are, in this instance, deferring the West Creek Public Safety Center out for just a period of time to make sure we address our most pressing needs. The question will be, for those that were excited to have an additional fire and rescue station, on the eastern side of the county, we can also upstaff existing stations to provide additional response in the interim term. But one of the issues that we had to take care of was the West Creek Station while we're going to continue to acquire property and those kinds of things, the actual construction will be beyond fiscal year '25. So that is one of the major changes in fire and rescue, as well as moving the ladder truck up. I'm not going to get into the individual line items on all of the others, but those were the big changes that are driving the new introduced capital improvement plan. Parks and Rec, this is most unchanged from what was in prior plan. There's not, as you can see, our investment here. We do have projects and needs well beyond what you're seeing here, but as we looked at the collective capital improvement plan, these are the projects that we had in that are going to continue to be recommended, but other projects and expansions are beyond fiscal year '25 in Parks and Rec in this plan. Information systems, this is highly unchanged. These are projects that primarily replace life cycles of particular pieces of equipment. And so from our prior capital improvement plan, the only thing that got changed, that I'll call your attention to, it's a $50 item, the AM radio station project. We pushed that back to fiscal year '22. We have some more work to do on that with our public safety providers before we make a determination to actually commit to that project. For those of you that I see some shaking of the head, we actually had for a number of years an AM radio station for emergency situations. If you drive through Goochland and catch the right sign that's not bent over, you will see a sign that talks about during emergencies tuning into these AM radio stations. They are not currently operational, and we are going to need to make the decision as we make investments. Is this an investment that is of value in our emergency management planning to reestablish that particular service? And so we have some more work to do on that. So we just delayed that implementation in this CIP. We have some more work to do on that particular project. Moving in, yeah.
Just a question. All these dollar figures, especially with fire rescue and things, I know there's a lot of grants and things available. These numbers are exclusive of that, right?
Yeah, I will tell you it's a misnomer to think that there is a lot of grants available. We have been blessed on occasion to get some ambulance funding. Back in the day, I sound like my dad. There used to be a time when counties were much more eligible for apparatus funding, and even at the equipment level. Right after 9/11, they had rolled out a ton of funds for equipment. A lot of companies used to get their breathing apparatus funds through there and turnout gear through those funds. They are drying up. Chief is here and could probably answer that a little bit better for you. But the opportunity for grant funds is much more limited than it used to be in public safety. And that's on both sides of our public safety house. So fundamentally, yes, most of the money you're seeing here is based on county funding. We do, that being said, we do apply for grants. And you know, Barbara, Eddie, anything I missed?
Where is Eddie? Well, we did get a grant this year for half an ambulance, and Chief intends to apply next year as well.
We do, right, yeah, we seek the grant opportunities, and honestly, Mr. Podesky is correct. Virginia Office of EMS has a grant available that we do apply for on a regular basis for ambulances. We just got some naloxone that way at no cost to the organization. I think $136,000 just came in for the last new ambulance that we just put into service. And you see in the CIP, there's another ambulance as of July 1st, and we'll apply in March to see if we can get 50% of that vehicle funded as well. When you get into some of the FEMA grants, the assistance to firefighter grants, we did apply for one of those last year. We were trying to get diesel exhaust extraction systems for 5 of our fire stations that don't presently have them. Company 6 does. You know, diesel fumes exhaust is a known carcinogen. We were turned down for that. We thought we had a strong case for that. We thought it was probably an easy grant we would probably get. It's about $60,000 per station we were turned down. But we are going to reapply for it just as soon as that process opens again through FEMA. They're reworking that process. So we look at the grants, and And the other thing with some of the grants is, you know, it's a ways in advance before you know whether you receive the grant or not. If you buy in advance of knowing, it disqualifies you. The ladder truck, for example, is an immediate need considering what's already built in the county and the calls that we already respond to, not to mention what's forecast to be built. So we're looking at that, and we're also even looking at how we could get that even sooner than if we stacked that ladder truck and ordered it from the very beginning, so.
Thank you for doing that. So if we do get lucky and get a grant, how does that come back? Like, so if half an ambulance gets paid for that we put in for a whole ambulance, how does that come back in?
That's a great question, because we ultimately we'll come to you and exercise the opportunity to get the grant funds and ask you to appropriate the grant funds to that project. That will free up potentially half the cost of an ambulance. Generally what we would do is not immediately, those funds would be freed up, but we'd bring you back a plan the next year that either reflected allocation of those funds, or they would fall to the bottom line of your capital improvement fund balance. And so they're not, unless this board appropriates them in a different way, they don't get spent. And so you as a board have to allocate them to projects.
And to give you some idea of what you're up against with, in particular the Office of Emergency Medical Services grant, they're usually about 12 million in requests, with somewhere between 4 and 5 million of grant funds to go around. And so you're competing with all the EMS agencies across the state who may have greater needs or be in underserved areas. And so that's what we're working with. So there's not always that opportunity to get 2 grants in a row. I mean, that's looked at as well. We certainly will try. The average mileage on their ambulance fleet is 122,000 miles, even considering we put 2 new ambulances into place over the last year. The mileage is still that high. When you look at, we have 3 out of service right now as I speak in the shop. So they're on the road a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering.
As we talk about transportation, this is primarily roads, but I want to talk about just briefly transportation from the standpoint of vehicle allocation, maintenance, fuel, those kind of things. One of the projects that Dr. Rayleigh and I talked about in greater detail than in the past is looking at our fleets collectively, looking at how fleets are allocated, the number of vehicles that departments have, the maintenance on all of those vehicles and the cycles of maintenance, and how we can look at extending lives and getting the most possible useful life out of our vehicles. We do that work today. I think what we're going to try to do is take a fresh look at it and see if there's ways that we can leverage each other's capacities in some way or another on the fleet side. The maintenance side, obviously we want to extend the lives of vehicles. You look at fleets in different ways. Obviously you treat a school bus different than a passenger vehicle, and you treat fire trucks different than you do those. And so you have to look at it as sort of a continuum of service on different kinds of vehicles. And so we'll be looking at that over the next year. Also fuel and fuel management is going to be a critical component for us to look at. And so I think in the next fiscal year, and we've talked to the sheriff about this and talked to the chief about this, we're going to do a much deeper dive and work on our collective fleet needs as a county. It's been something, quite honestly, I know we wanted to get to and dive into since we got here even more. But really are going to work with our collective staffs to dive into that even more. I can assure you it's not been lost, or it's not been a focus area, but I think that when we can be a little more deliberate about looking at those kinds of things. I hear things, and you do too, where someone will drive by here on a Saturday and see 10 cars sitting in the parking lot and wondering why we have 10 cars, and why has the sheriff got this, or why is there all these buses sitting here. We answer those questions pretty regularly, but I think that we can provide even more context and help people appreciate our fleets in a little more detail. And quite honestly, because our people are our biggest cost centers on the operational side, the vehicles, I don't want to underestimate the cost of those vehicles. Sheriff's deputies each have assigned vehicles, and you start carrying that out through fleets and those kinds of things. It is a large cost center, and we budget appropriately for those kinds of things. Transportation. in your spare time, if you really wanna see 25 years of transportation needs for the county, you'll go in there and see, just over, $250,000, or $250 million, I wish it was 250,000, of projects. We anticipate receiving state and federal funds for the majority of transportation needs. I will tell you what's in the capital improvement on the plan for the transportation plan is not even half of what we believe the collective needs for Goochland County are on transportation. We're not too dissimilar of other surrounding jurisdictions. The available funding for transportation far exceeds the collective needs that any particular jurisdiction has. We do feel on the county side that it's important that we document, clarify our priorities as it relates to particular roads. A lot of these are driven, there's a number of factors on the county side that these come up with. Road safety is always one of the top priorities when we look at prioritizing projects. Then you start looking at capacities of roads. And when I say capacities, that's really the traffic flow, the congestion, a number of major factors, failing intersections, all of that feeds into that process. One of the projects the county is working on is a much more comprehensive database that if a road is of priority to the county, you'll be able to go in and see where it stands. Road projects are one of the most costly, time-consuming, and frustrating projects we take on because we don't necessarily manage these projects. The average lifespan, once a project even is approved, it takes 5 to 6 years to actually get constructed. And so that it's a very long window on transportation projects, but we felt it was extremely important to make sure that we did include transportation, and it's a key area for us on the county side in our capital improvement plan. So if you're looking to move money, don't touch the road projects because it's not money that you can actually apply to any other projects. So.
Mr. Podesky, just because I don't know, how does the VDOT play into the plan that's made for transportation? I don't know if they come to us about some things or if we're going to them every time. I don't know how that works.
It's a great question, and if you ask me tomorrow, I'm going to give you a different answer than I give you right now.
Okay, fair enough.
Unfortunately, the VDOT process seems to change at least in gubernatorial cycles, at least on that kind of. And so you would love to think it's a very collegial, professional process that we're working as a team to deliver results. Unfortunately, it's all bucketed. So there's different federal buckets, there's state buckets. You apply for projects. They will help justify certain projects as far as meeting warrants and other kinds of things. And then you apply to yet another funding source that's pseudo under their purview to compete for funds. And while it may be a priority for us, it may not be a priority for the region, and so on as it relates to the funding availability. And so the irony to all of that is there's times that we'll literally be sitting at our desks and they'll call us and say, magically this money appeared and we have this project for you tomorrow that wasn't on that list. And so I don't want to, we value our partnership with VDOT, but I will tell you it's herding cats sometimes to really hone in the road projects. The board members that participate in the transportation process, they're prematurely gray. I didn't go there. But I will tell you the transportation process is quite frustrating, and so I'm sensitive and respectful of our residents' frustrations when they ask us about road projects. Unfortunately, we have less control over the road projects and priorities than we would prefer.
Thank you.
Todd, did I cover that okay?
Yeah. And for just education purposes, we do have the major thoroughfare plan that the board adopted, and it was an update. We already had the plan, we just updated it and reworked it. There's a lot of changes that were made from the old plan to the new one. That was back in November of 2018. So we do have a new plan for a guiding document, and that is something that VDOT does look at, and they don't really approve it so much as just review it and just say this looks good to us. So that is one of our documents. but there's some others too.
Thank you.
And there's legislation, I think, that's still alive, the Central Virginia Transportation, I think that, is that still alive as far as, I'll have to check.
I haven't had a chance to update the board on this, but as of 7 o'clock last night, it's hitting a bunch of barriers.
Okay.
We were about to send out a recommendation to the board today on the regional transportation bill, and some things hit a wall about 6, 7 o'clock last night. And so I think the region collectively recognizes there is a greater transportation need that there needs to be funding to. The irony to it is, even if we liked the proposed legislation, those that are in the transportation realm have their own idea of what the best solution for transportation solutions are, and have raised objections to the regional transportation bill. The folks that were proposing the regional transportation bill didn't like the other bill because it was heavily focused on transit. And so it's, I think, what I thought had a slim chance of making it through has less of a chance as I'm sitting here. And
Less than slim. Wow.
That could change by
Slim
11
enough.
o'clock.
Wow.
We literally were almost prepared to share today with the board a recommendation and got new data late last night. So there will, the fundamental component of Mr. Lumpkin's question is there is a recognition that there's revenue needs beyond what jurisdictions have capacities for today. I think it's going to take some effort to work through what that real solution will look like at the end of the day. I think there's probably at least a half dozen different transportation bills in right now that relate to funding impacts to localities. This session is not your normal session, and so I hope there's efforts to either revive that in a more satisfactory condition, or they don't make a hasteful decision and we have to live with it. It's almost better if it goes to study at this point. And so more to come on that, but I think there's important work.
Mr. Tedeschi, I meant to look at the long-range transportation plan, I didn't do it, I'm sorry. But the Ashland Road, Broad Street Road, that's the widening of the road, right?
It is.
23 million, that's not the intersection, which is in a different year. Is that the full funded amount? That is, okay, thank you. I just couldn't remember. And that's from Broad to Ashland, to the interchange, and then you've got interchange beyond to the Hanover line, is a separate item.
That's correct. There's 3 different projects.
Right, gotcha. Okay, so I thought.
A couple more pieces on the county side we're going to talk about just to give you a little bit more context, and then we're going to switch to the school side, and Dr. Raley will help me there. We're going to touch base a little bit on the utility side, just for after the revenue discussion here. Just to give you a little bit of context, we look at utilities as a completely different model than our general fund side of the house. Utilities has specific, it's operated much more like a business. It's not in the sense that we try to operate at a profit margin, but it's based on revenues in, revenues out kind of model. And it's self-sustaining, so it's actually paying back a small loan to the general fund that we pay back in the next year or two. Other than that, it is all self-sustaining, so I won't spend too much time on utilities here today, but I do need to spend a little bit of time on revenues. One of the things we introduced last time that both boards met was a model to help appreciate sort of the box that we're in, based on what we have available to fund all of these projects. It's important to recognize we are starting from a really great position. We have very strong debt policies that limit the amount of debt that we can borrow. We're far under all of our debt capacities and policies. We also have some debt rolling off on the general fund side in the next 2 years, which frees up those funds to be allocated to additional projects. And on an annual basis, we have been contributing additional operating cash to pay debt service. And so for those that are less familiar with this, debt is is a harder model to understand than the operational side. For our perspective on a debt basis, debt service is the amount we contribute annually to pay our debt obligations. So you have to budget for that and make sure that you can pay that ongoing payment. Debt capacity is how much you could potentially borrow up to over a period of time. And so they're related but completely different. But we have to look at both sides of that equation as we look at taking on additional debt. So right now as I said, we're about to pay off most of the school debt. We have a little, probably in the $9 million range on the county side. That does give us some capacity that we can borrow over term for additional projects. The capital improvement plan that you have in front of you ultimately projects us borrowing out around $54 million in the next 5 years. But it also projects the use of cash and existing debt capacity. You'll see that we also fund some of these projects with either grants or donations or proffers. When it relates to proffers, let me just touch base on that, because we've told both boards over the years that the proffers have changed, and they have. And so from a financial management standpoint, we've actually had to manage the proffers that we got before January 1 of 2016 in one way, and the proffers we've received July 1 of 2016, and then after July 1 of 2016. And what's the difference? Well, one, before July 1 of 2016, you used to be able to give money to libraries, and proffers are no longer eligible to fund libraries, amongst some other nuances that have changed. After July 1 of 2016, another issue had happened to us. We used to apply a proffer across the county. We have now had to apply proffers in particular zones in our community. And so we collect sort of an eastern, central, and western proffer now. And so as those funds come in for those areas, we also have to be sensitive as we're allocating that the projects that the funds were collected for in those areas are what's being funded and not something else. And so it's changed the way we use proffer money. But we did have existing proffer funds prior to July 1 of 16. And it's important to note that if you were approved prior to July 1 of 16, your proffer still gets applied collectively. If you were approved after July 1, 2016, it gets applied per those regions. And so you might have been approved in 1990, but you're just building a house today. You're approved under the old proffer standards. If you're approved yesterday, it's the new. And so we have to track all the funding that way as well. And so it's created a new tracking challenge, but working through all of that. On the grants and donations, we know what we're getting in particular areas, or we've estimated those kinds of things. And the reserves, as you see in 21, reserves are basically what did we have available from prior year fund balance and that was committed, and this is cash when we're talking about this. The contingent on previous year's savings, you'll see 3.5, 3.1, 3.3, 2.7. I will point out that this is a slight change from the last year's capital improvement plan. As we were going through this, and I think we were all a little concerned that we had numbers over 4 million in some of these years. The numbers that we're using here are much more consistent on our historical year-end savings to apply cash. So I think it's while we felt generally comfortable last year, I think this produces even a higher level of comfort that this is real cash we can obtain on a particular year. When you start, we've had good years, and I don't want to say we won't save over 4 million to apply to future year capital in the future. I think all of us are, and as we develop conservative budgets, we're all worried that there may be a change in this economy at some point. And so we tried to account for some of that in our planning efforts as it related to the revenues. So as you may be aware, unlike the federal government, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and well, Commonwealth's not a good example. We as a locality are required to balance a budget. Our expenditures can't exceed our revenues. And so as we have worked within those parameters, everything in this capital improvement plan is balanced to this cash and debt availability. And when you do it that way, that means there are projects that make it into the collective plan and then others that do not. And so you're always welcome to come back to this. This model here illustrates, there's a couple things going on here. If you can see the yellow block there.
Wanna stop?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, no.
Go back, remind me again, in, fiscal year 23, grants, donations, 7.9 million. What is that?
It's state money for roads.
Gotcha.
That whole
I knew I
line
had
is
the
really,
answers.
state money for
Gotcha,
roads.
okay, thank you.
Almost all of
I just couldn't remember. Thank you very much, sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. That's what we're here for. So you heard me say earlier that we're in a really good position because our existing debt's rolling off. Should we not take on any additional debt, you can see collectively in 2032 there, all of the existing debt on today's books, and this doesn't include TCSD, this is just general fund, would be paid off. And you can see that the proportionate drop after really 21 there, we dropped from just over $3 million of debt service down to $2 million of debt service payments. And what does that mean? That means we can either continue to pay down the debt or we have capacities to potentially take on new debt. As we've looked at the projects and needs that you're seeing in this plan, we banked on having some of those capacities of cash when that debt rolls off to free up that cash. And you can see the new debt service really is the blue line. So it actually has a peak up there in it sort of drops down and flatlines in 2033. How do we achieve that? Well, you see the red line there? That red line is based on maintaining sort of a static debt service level. We're able to achieve that because we've taken the cash from the debt service pay down and the new borrowings and actually cover that. So even though there's a few years of debt service that's almost $1 million higher, we actually have that because we've saved or cash funded earlier that ability, which allows us to level those payments. Does everybody understand this model? Really the red line is what we're trying to achieve, but to get there, it's a combination of ways to fund it. That make this? There's no magic to this. This is just, it's dollars in, dollars out, and how we can balance this. Before it.
Can I ask for clarification on that? So on the schools, if we're building out our new elementary school, what you're saying is that $500,000 every year is what you're setting aside for this? Is that what you're talking about?
No, that 500,000 is just being set aside for the project.
So it's just reducing the amount you're.
Right, we have
going to
a
have to
separate
borrow.
debt service budget
Okay,
that
so
we're building up to.
we don't see that. We don't see that.
Correct.
Okay.
Good question. Everyone understand that question? There are, not only on the school side, but even on the county side, that we will put some cash to the project, even if it's planned to be borrowed, so we don't have to borrow as much at the end of the day. Plus, we have another fund that we've made contributions to, where it exists today to pay the existing debt service. We've added cash to it in excess of what those annual payments are. So when we actually get the new payments, we have that additional cash to pay the debt. So this is what we will use no matter what we do. But I want, before I leave this slide, I think it's important for us to recognize, well, we have a 25-year capital improvement plan, and there are needs beginning in year 6 and through 25. We have to be sensitive that just because those projects show up in year 6 of the plan or year 7 or 8, that doesn't mean that we have substantial additional debt capacity in those particular years. There are additional needs that we could not fund in the 5-year plan, but we are still going to be constrained when we get beyond year 5. And there's different, this isn't on a policy basis, this is just on a debt service cash ability to pay your annual payments. And so, and that's within our 53-cent tax rate, that's what we have available, and that's how we can, between cash and debt, take on $54 million worth of projects with no impact to our taxpayers. no additional impact. And so that's how this CIP that you're seeing has been balanced and developed. We do recognize there are collective needs beyond this 5 years, and those are conversations I think need to be had, and staff has thoughts and considerations. But again, we have been working within the constraints of this model here as we develop this capital improvement plan.
Can you
Yeah,
go,
I'm not-
excuse me,
Mr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, if you can go back to that slide, I just wanted to provide just a little bit more insight into this slide. When you see the blue go above the red is what we take in, the blue is what goes out. When we went to New York to meet with the rating agencies, they said that tells us you're running a deficit during those years where the blue is above the red. And our response was, yeah, but the green is reserves that we're drawing down, they're cash reserves. And they said, well, that green cash reserves is a one-time source, because once you spend cash, you don't have it. The blue is a recurring debt service requirement. So you're using one-time sources to fund recurring debt service needs, and that's a mismatch that gives them a little bit of anxiety. And so they weren't entirely embracing this concept. Now, if we had decided we needed to build the school a few years earlier and shifted that blue box, which is the 54 million, to the left and borrowed it earlier, you could see there'd be a huge spike above that red line, because the blue would stack on top of a much higher yellow. Conversely, if we wait a year or two and borrow it later, that blue box shifts to the right and steps down that yellow, and it drops us below the red line. So that's one of the dynamics we're trying to wrestle with now, is the timing of the issuance and where we are from a recurring versus a non-recurring expenditure on debt service. So I just want to share that with the group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't plan to spend much time on utilities. There's not necessarily a relevance to switching projects and utilities out for consideration. They're just viewed independently, and this is consistent with the prior adopted utility capital improvement plan. So let's talk about education. I'm going to talk briefly and then turn it over to Dr. Raley here. There are a couple major considerations as we looked at this year's capital improvement plan. Obviously, you heard me talk about the court's needs being a higher priority for the county's projects, and we did that at the cost and trade-off of some other projects. Last year's capital improvement plan, and I'll work with estimates, we had agreed with the school board that Goochland Elementary was by far the top priority and need for this community. In fact, from a borrowing standpoint and total cost standpoint, it was one of the earliest projects we were tackling in the 5-year capital improvement plan. And once that plan was adopted, your staffs have gone back and done additional work. I think it's fair to say the construction market has changed in the past 24 months and has driven us to revise some construction estimates. And we've also brought into clarity some additional needs. When we were talking about Goochland Elementary last year, if the boards recall, last year we made the change from a 500 student school to a 650 student school, and that number was just over 33 million. At that time, we did not necessarily have any of the road improvements, parking lot, traffic control issues identified. The schools had come to us with two numbers, and I want to be very clear. What you're seeing here is the county administrator's recommended capital improvement plan. This is not exactly what the schools were presented to us. And so initially the schools had come in and saying they thought that the elementary school project was just north of 36 million and that the road projects were just north of 4 million. We had to make some decisions as we looked at the collective CIP to balance out some of these projects to a certain extent. Did share back with Dr. Raley and the team what we had done so when you're seeing Goochland Middle School upgrades there, that really is traffic flow improvements on the campus and the road improvements to Bulldog Way, on both ends of Bulldog Way. And I don't know if that includes the turning lanes at the schools or not, but we had to account for the road improvements. So just from last year's Goochland Elementary to this year's Goochland Elementary, we've had to increase that one project, give or take $6 million. And so to do Goochland Elementary the best justice we can, and let me tell you some of my thoughts from the county's perspective. We paid very keen attention to the school's efforts on the needs collectively for the school system. There is not a school that doesn't have particular needs. When we focused on Goochland Elementary last year, part of the reason we talked about going to 650 students was we recognized that the pressures on both Byrd and Randolph could be mitigated to some standard by doing some redistricting and building a larger Goochland Elementary, and that would extend the lives of those two buildings. And we needed to extend the lives of those buildings because we don't have another $35 million to build a new school in the very short term. And so we tried and paid attention when the numbers changed this year to make sure that that priority was still done correctly. All of us, there's some thought into this as well from a priority standpoint. We could scale that project back and say, okay, let's go back to a 500 student. It does not solve collective needs of our county. And I don't think there's a project that we've scaled back over the years that someone down the road says, why didn't those people do this right in the first place? And we tried to the best of our ability in this recommendation, even though the project grew by that much. And some folks will say, how can a project grow by that much? Well, one, we didn't include the road improvements in the original estimates. It was Goochland Elementary proper. And I think it's fair to say, while the schools work with their consultants, we are seeing a substantial increase in the construction market. So what you're seeing here is just shy, in that 15 to 20% range increase over earlier numbers. That's what we're seeing in the construction market right now. So it's a lot of money. The bids will ultimately tell us what the real numbers are. These are estimates. But the construction market has changed. There is high competition for good contractors with good subs to deliver solid projects, not only in the governmental markets, but in the private markets. And so Goochland Elementary School, to the best of our ability in this 5-year capital improvement plan, even though there's approximately $6 million more given to this project, remains one of the top priorities in the capital improvement plan that we are introducing. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Ray to talk about some of the other projects here. But I think it's important to recognize, in order to support the growth in costs in Goochland Elementary, to address a large portion of the county's courts needs, there were trade-offs. And those trade-offs were, we had to delay the full construction of the courthouse by almost $8 million, was pushed beyond the 5-year capital improvement plan. Approximately $6 million for West Creek Public Safety Center was pushed beyond the 5-year plan. And the middle and high school project had to be pushed beyond the 5-year plan. All 3 of those projects, and maybe other projects to both of these boards' thoughts and perspectives, they remain priorities. But given the constraints that I went over on the revenue discussion, we had to make some decisions. And the courthouse need, while if you go ask 10 residents, would they rather have a courthouse or a school or a fire station, most likely the fire station would be answer 3 of that question. Or excuse me, the courthouse would be answer 3 of that question. From our perspective, we have to balance those needs with the school's needs and the county's needs, and this was one way to accomplish that goal. There are needed projects in this community that we had to make hard decisions to either change the scope of them and or push them beyond the 5 years. So, Spinner, you got a question?
I'm good.
Dr. Ridley, why don't I turn the school stuff over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Podesky. And I first of all want to say that as I sit here, every time we have a work session, it gives me greater appreciation for the challenges that you face and the difficulties associated with juggling so many demands, from roads to buildings to the needs of public safety in schools. And so I thank you for your service and for the challenges that you face and your willingness to consider the needs that we have as a school division. I too am thankful for the approach that Mr. Wiedeski has taken to this work. It's been transparent, it's been two-way, it's been collaborative. It's been, what do you think about this, Jeremy? I might not be able to do this. What's a priority here? And so it's been another symbol of our partnership together, and I'm extremely grateful for that. Thankful too that in this proposal at this time, that Goochland Elementary School is the focus of the school's funding. Certainly we've discussed in multiple settings the needs from an educational adequacy standpoint and a facility condition index standpoint, the needs that we have of that space. And the opportunity for a long-term solution. Building a new Goochland Elementary School is a legacy project for this community, one that will outlast us, and one that we do want to do well. It does give us some long-term growth and some ability to accommodate some of the changing demands of our community. With the school of 650 students, it buys us some time, honestly, to plan for the future for Byrd and Randolph and the western and eastern portions of our community. So I certainly can fully support the approach that Mr. Wiedeski has taken, and thankful that GES is at the center of the school's funding model. Some other projects that are included, just for conversation purposes, just include the ongoing needs that we have to maintain the standard of service that our community has come to expect, and ultimately that we want to provide to our occupants, specifically our students. We know that it's difficult to learn in an environment where there are leaky roofs and you're hot or you're cold or you just feel unsafe. So the funds that are requested in the other lines in the green sections certainly relate to the ongoing needs of the school division in the future. And you know, it's $25,000 here, it's $75,000 there, and certainly all those dollars add up. And included in that also is the ongoing needs to keep our fleet current. And certainly, the public face of our school division are those yellow school buses that are going up and down the road, and they're transporting the most precious cargo that we can ever transport, and that being our students. So this includes a replacement of one school bus a year through the capital budget, and as you have approved in the past, we have funding for school buses in the operational budget as well. I think it is important to discuss the middle school secondary projects just a little bit, and as there have been compromises and challenges as you face the budget of balancing, you know, you have the courthouse needs, we talked about fire safety, but the middle school, high school projects are one for future consideration in years when funding becomes available. You know that our secondary complex is used daily, many times until 10 o'clock at night. And it's really, in many ways, the entertainment hub of our community. It's a place where people congregate to go to basketball games and socialize, and it's a cultural hub too, as we have many performances there. But that facility was built in 2001, and as we look at the changing needs of a high school program, there are certainly a need to do some interior renovations to that space with some unusable spaces that are currently in existence. And then ultimately, as our community grows and expands, looking at the athletic and extracurricular needs that we have. And all of that is included in future years in this proposal. But as you face those challenges in out years, that's certainly something that would be a need for us as we go beyond the 5-year window. But thankful for the approach that has been taken in your consideration for the needs that we have at this time.
I'll ask it. So, you know, just doing a little, so line 328, the number 328 far left, that's the road, right? That's Bulldog, that's the money for Bulldog?
Mm-hmm. 326, 3.708 million is for a turn lane heading west
So
on.
where am I, that's three?
Next line down.
Yeah, next line down.
Three, so, oh, there's the three, okay. So 320, all right, so do you mind, I wrote it down wrong, but okay, so 328, 326 is Bulldog Road, the road stuff, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so what did the, just to give us, I don't need a lot of detail, but the 783 and the 859 for Randolph, can you tell us a little bit what, just what those projects are?
Sure, there's definitely some high dollar figures in that. So the Randolph figure in FY '21 is county funding for the remainder of what it will take for us to renovate the parking lot at Randolph Elementary School. That's about a $1.5 million project. The other funding has been set aside through a proffer model, and so we are in the process of going out to bid for that here within the next couple of weeks, and we anticipate, if funded, for that to be up and running for the start of school in the fall. $783,000 there in FY '21 for Goochland High School includes some high dollar projects, specifically approximately $538,000 for some roof upgrades. As I said, that facility was built in 2001. Average lifespan of the roof is 20 to 25 years, so we have a need to replace both the rubber roof and some other roofing components there at the secondary complex. We include some flooring upgrades, specifically some carpeting within our auditorium. As you know, that's a high-profile space, and it's a chance for us to renovate that space with some new flooring. And it includes some money for HVAC and some athletic facility upgrades.
And we'll just keep going with that. The 859 for Randolph was the parking lot, the
Yes, ma'am.
725 and 22.
725 the next year.
Yeah.
$500,000 of that is for electrical systems, which would include the installation of the generator, much like we did at Bird this year. $100,000 for HVAC improvements and $75,000 for us to add an additional well for redundancy. When sometimes we've had some issues with our water systems there, and we've had to tote in water, so that would be the drilling and installation of the second well.
Thank you.
One more question.
Yes, Mr.
Secretary.
Senator.
Is the GTEC old, the technical center, and are there plans to grow that? It seems pretty stable, but I know there's been a lot of call in the community, and I'm a big proponent of the CTE program. Do you see that kind of staying consistent or growing, or?
So the $25,000 there that we have in each year is the ongoing upgrades of basic HVAC and electrical systems for that facility. And so minimal funding for that space, as it is our hope in future years, specifically FY '27 in this plan, that we would build a 30,000 square foot addition to the high school, which would include the abandonment of the CTE center and some additional spaces for STEM and some other maybe potential fine arts programming as well.
No, just, if Neil's done.
Yes, sir.
So, I think Mr. Badesky kind of teed it up. This is a big decision, and I think if we approve this, I think we're setting some things in place for down the road, decisions that'll need to be made. And Mr. Peterson pointed out, if we can shift that blue thing over some, that may help. But that would mean pushing out Goochland Elementary out further. So if we're not going to do that, we're going to adopt this. I think we do need to hear from you all and be confident in the numbers. Now, Mr. Badesky pointed out that we're not, we don't want to be in a position like, what were they thinking? If we underbuild. But there are examples of overbuilding that when I first got on the school board in nearby county, it overbuilt, and people are looking at why is this building empty? Part of this building is so empty. So, and when I was on the school board, we looked at all these numbers, and it's a lot of art and some science and a blend of that. Are the numbers bearing out your latest studies? Are they supporting this higher number? The enrollment numbers.
Yeah, gosh, I wish we had a crystal ball. We can only make decisions based on the best data we have. We have updated current data based on demographic projections of experts who do this for a living. We have experienced a minor drop in enrollment this year. We fully expect that's going to return to where it has been in the past, and there's so many economic variables that impact that. But even at the decreased enrollment that we have today, 650-seat elementary school, if open today, would allow us to eliminate the trailers of both Randolph and Bird, and would be opening at approximately 85% capacity, which is which is not a bunch of unleft spaces. So I think it would be appropriately used and allow for future growth.
So the 650 would, at your projections, it would open at 85% for Gooch Elementary, relieve pressure at Randolph and Byrd. What are your projections for the percentages at
I
Randolph
think it
and
would be,
Byrd?
and these are approximate numbers, Mr. Moore, because I'd have to go back and fine tune my figures, but it would allow all of our facilities to be at approximately 85%
All the
utilization.
elementary facilities?
Yes, sir.
And that'll last us how long? As long as the buildings are suitable, if you're at 85%, what do the models tell us of how long those schools will last?
Yeah, then it begins, you don't look at capacity as much as you look at the educational adequacy of the space, and you look at the facility condition. Now, there are
Sure.
funds in here to make sure that we maintain and upkeep those facilities, but part of the conversation was in year 28 and year 33 that we begin to look at replacements for those aging structures. Ultimately, that's long-term, and that's going to be dependent on resources available. But there will be a need in the future to replace those aging structures.
Yeah, I understand.
So we think we have the capacity to get us to that point of replacement, which will be done then because of the condition of existing facilities,
Not so much for capacity. That's true.
If
yeah.
need be, at that point, then we address some, tidal wave of capacity issues or whatever. The timelines that we have, I think will allow us to do.
Are y'all up for redistricting?
I don't think it doesn't really matter whether we're up for redistricting.
Go to battle, go to
Redistricting,
ourselves.
It's a fact of life, and so what we're trying to do is to get out ahead and have these communications in public and let everybody know that this is coming, and where that is and what that means for your house or your road. We don't have the answers yet, but it'll be a very open and public process, and I think, quite frankly, people are going to try to be going into this zone, not prevent this. And so what we're going to probably hear more backlash from is the idea that somebody didn't make it into the new GPS zone versus whether they had to suddenly change.
Because it's gonna be the.
Everybody loves the shiny car.
Well, it is, it's gonna be gorgeous, I'm sure.
Right.
It better be.
Fair. I think that's a fair expectation.
We definitely want to have a quality project with value for our taxpayers. This is a significant project for this community, and we want to do it and do it well. But at the same time, we are stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, and we want to make sure that we honor that and have a quality project that we can be proud of.
A lot of eyes will be on it, as everybody knows. I mean, it will be 22,000 critics, what we're doing. I just have one question, Dr. Bailey.
Sure.
Just today, and I know the projections are gonna go up, but just today, approximately how many elementary students do we have in the county total? Just rough numbers. Questions are gonna get hung.
So I'll give you very rough numbers. It's approximately 280 students at Byrd, approximately 315 at Goochland, so what's that? 630 plus about 470 at Randolph.
Oh, so you're going
What is it, 630 plus 470, that's 1,100.
Okay.
11/24.
11/24.
That's
There you
in
go.
December 31st.
I was close, wasn't I?
You were
Not bad off the top of it.
Can I make one comment to John Lumpkin's question, direct comment to his question? Our enrollment consultants will not give us numbers beyond 10 years. So we really only have some idea of what they project until 28, 29. So we're only as good as what we can get data from consultants.
And then you can imagine there's a lot more confidence in the first 5 years than there is in the second 5
Okay,
years.
so the drop that we're seeing, the drop that you're talking about, was that predicted by the consultant?
No.
how off was the consultant?
About 98% accurate, weren't they, Debbie?
They were still fairly accurate. They had what was called a low projection, a recommended projection, and a high. And we were budgeting at the recommended, and right now we're on the low projection, and so next year we're budgeting at the low projection level, assuming that we're really sort of on that pathway maybe for a few years.
So, like all these numbers, there are stories behind these numbers, and so I hear from principals weekly. We had 3 show up and register today. All had 4 new students come in the door. But, there are some ins and outs associated with that, but I think we are becoming more and more transient over time. I think that is a given in our environment right now. Used to be you only got students during the summer and when school started in August, but now we're getting students throughout the course of the year, so that's a changing dynamic for us.
That's a societal.
I just wanna say that you talk about being stewards of the tax dollars. Gosh, it is so much more. We are stewards of the future of these children. I mean, that, when you think about everything that involves, it's so powerful, it's so amazing, it's such great work. It's so powerful, so that we have to look at that within our buildings. What does that say for our students' engagement, safety, their just daily learning? So it's powerful.
Right now, and I'm not arguing against any of this, okay, I'm just having a discussion here. Right now, approximately 30% of our elementary students go to Goochland Elementary, if I'm doing the numbers right. Under the new school, it'd be 61%. And I understand, we're trying to get the money to do Goochland, right, elementary. So to build additional schools is just not in the plan. But the thought of having elementary schools close and not having a mega high school, middle school makes sense, but a mega elementary from an elementary school student standpoint, that's still, you've thought through all that, and I understand the cost of, having neighborhood schools and that kind of thing.
If I may, the 650 against today's enrollment allows for 61%. 650 in 2024 may not be 61%, maybe 55, it may be.
Oh, I see what you said,
yes.
because of the growth, right,
Right.
yeah, or,
Right.
right.
At least what's projected.
Right.
So it may not be quite that high, but yeah, I think your point is valid, that, we're certainly creating a hub
Right.
type of facility there.
Right.
Yeah, there are, elementary schools are right size, like you can be too small, and you can be too big as well, and so I think the average elementary size in new construction is about 750 students when built. Now, that's average communities across this Commonwealth. We do what's best for our community.
Oh, sure.
We had this conversation last night during a work session about budget. There comes a point in time when you only have 2 or 3 teachers at a grade level, it kind of hinders some of the things that you can accomplish from a staffing and programmatic standpoint.
Right.
We don't want to get too big because we're Goochland, we have a family feel.
Right.
I don't think 650 is going to negatively impact that family feel and the
Okay.
culture that we want inside that facility.
Okay, I'm just,
That's great.
I'm not surprised you hadn't thought about that, but it's just, the more you bus, particularly elementary students around, the more,
Well, I think you have some people that currently go to Randolph that probably physically closer to Goshen Elementary.
Absolutely true.
yeah, so they would be probably happy.
If you look at the current boundary maps right now, there are little notches that are cut out, and you're like, oh my gosh, why'd they do that? There's probably a reason.
It's a lot.
That's an easy place to go because of that notch, like, let's go right here, it's 5 minutes away.
Kind of like electoral maps, right? They got gerrymandered. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Any questions, Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I could, Dr. Relli, I just wanted to echo your comment before about the cooperative nature of these 2 boards. I'm not sure everybody here appreciates how unique this is to have the Board of Supervisors and the school board all in the same room at the same time. without any kinetic activity, and no workplace violence. This is truly special. It's one of the special things about Goodson, so I just wanted to echo those sentiments. Also, you mentioned your crystal ball is a little fuzzy as you go in the out years. You obviously have competition from charter schools, home schools, private schools, virtual learning. It's a little difficult to project, but we have to project something. And so one of the things is to consider flexibility in design. Have you, as I understand it, one of the constraints on just adding students to a school is the ability to serve lunch to the entire population or to have an assembly with the entire population. Have you considered upsizing those common areas so that rather than build a next new school, you could just add a wing? Have you thought about that?
Yes, sir, we have. That was conversation that the past board had in November and December of 2018, prior to coming in here to discuss this last year. We provided pricing with a gymnasium and a cafeteria and other common spaces for $650, but student center is at, let's say, $550. And at that time, I think the differential was about $1.5 million, maybe $2 million. I'd have to go back, Mr. Peterson, and look at some of that data. But that has been conversation that the past board has had.
I mean, I guess you mentioned the average size is 750. If you build the common areas for 750, but build the wings for 650 today, as opposed to adding another new school. So we should think about these kind of things to build in flexibility, again, given that our crystal balls are a little cloudy as to what actually might occur.
Yes, sir.
Now, I just wanted to share that thought as well. From our side, we're very mindful that if we approve a new rooftop development, if it's age restricted, it won't put a stress on the school system. If it's not age restricted, we know that may generate some students, and if it's a townhome or higher density, if it's a 1 or 2 bedroom, it'll put less demand on schools. So we're mindful of that as well, just so that you're aware that these are things that we think about as we go through our jobs as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Madam Chairman, if I could, just as we try to come to some conclusions here today, one, I want to thank everybody for the thoughtful questions. There's a lot of work to be done yet. We have more rolling up the sleeves to do on the county's operational budget's not introduced for another 3 weeks, plus we have a substantial number of budget sessions, just as the schools do as well. What I was hoping to get out of today is a general concurrence or understanding of this is how I plan to introduce the capital side of the county's budget. Recognize there are some important needs that this community has that aren't reflected in the 5-year. My hope is that if there's some concurrence to move forward in the fashion that we have presented here today, that we would work that through this year's budget process, take the feedback from our citizens and such, but follow up with a joint meeting of these bodies to talk about not only how we actually implement what makes it through the adopted budget this year, but how we potentially could address or tackle the needs that are beyond the 5-year window in other manners. The boards have options, there's citizen opportunities to participate in those decisions, but I thought it was critical that we focus on the priorities of the 5-year before we dive much more deep into those conversations. And so, I know I started to share this recommendation with the Board of Supervisors over the past few weeks. I know some of the school board, this shouldn't be too different and I know some folks are new, but fundamentally we did preserve the top priorities of the school system, did not dive too deep into the ongoing operational improvements, and there are trade-offs. So I don't want to dispute that there are needs that are not necessarily addressed in this 5 years that the schools have. That is also reflective of the county side as well. But my hope is that we can move forward, work towards adoption of this, focus on the priorities, specifically Goochton Elementary, and then come back and have additional conversations on how we could tackle those unmet needs. So I think that's sort of the gut check at this point in the process. We're not asking you to adopt anything, we're not asking you for a vote, but if there are concerns that are, at least, and obviously this isn't the only opportunity to bring those up, if there are major concerns or roadblocks that we have at this point before we work our way through the next few months of budget process, it'd be important to hear them now or as soon as you gain your thoughts, so we can consider those as we move forward to April on the county side. But I suggest to both boards that this door is left wide open for additional conversations, because I think we both recognize there's needs that also need to be considered here that may not be reflected in just what this plan shows.
Board, any additional comments or questions?
Just so I understand the takeaway, Madam Chair. So this is the county's proposal. We haven't seen where this doesn't meet what the school's proposal has been. When will we get a view of, or does it say, hey, here's what we're proposing, and then the school comes back? So how do we see where we're not aligned?
The process, good question.
One of the things that we do both on we'll do it on the capital side for you, and we do it on the operational side, is because I give you a county administrator recommended budget, that does not mean that there weren't needs that we couldn't address. The schools, and it's a good question, because the schools adopted one plan in November, and then as we've had conversations, I think they've ultimately aligned a little bit with what's in this plan. And so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and Debbie, you know, if the schools would like us to share with the board what was considered back in November, and admittedly it was a different school board, we're glad to do that, because that was probably more reflective of the plan that was adopted last year, but the numbers have been revised. So, as I said earlier, Gooch Elementary is now at a different cost, the roads have come in. The middle high school was in that, and that included the G-Tech Center. When we moved it out in what you have here, we've also had to increase the cost in out years because we were delaying its construction. And so, if the school board would like, we're glad to share what was adopted in November, or do you want to share the revised that's more in alignment with this? So I respect that either way.
Well, first off, I'd love to have the entire board have an opportunity to decide upon that, but if I could add just some context from that board last year, not necessarily this board. What we presented was very much done in a manner to present the best, most accurate information we had at that point, and then to allow the Board of Supervisors and all of the staff that work for them to then try and find a way to make some of these needs happen. I think it would be pretty bold of us to try and, cast aside all the work that's been done. I think, at least from my standpoint, having been an integral part of that process and this process, I understand what's happening, and I understand the motivations and the need to balance more needs than you have needs. And so, I mean, I will happily take and poll and spend time with my board and see if there's something that, for whatever reason, they feel a need to make an appeal to you about. But I think this process is meant to be inclusive for everybody here, that whether it be a board member or anybody on the staffs for either of those two boards. So, if there's something that troubles you or you've got questions about, I assume that in some way we will either speak about it here or in the next few days, but I don't anticipate any sort of necessarily an official action, more likely a follow-up conversation. Does that make sense?
Hearing no additional conversation, we are going to move forward with this. Please know that we value not only your staff, but the school board's approach and considerations in this process. there is room for modification all the way up to when it's adopted for the year. And then we would revisit this every year. So I think these discussions amongst both boards is extremely helpful and healthy. I do want to thank Dr. Rayleigh, Debbie, and the full school team on my side, Barbara and her full team that do all of the real work. Dr. Rayleigh and I are just the pretty faces. It's well, not so pretty some. Honestly, the amount of effort that just goes to get to this point is fairly substantial. And you know, when we're going the questions that some of you ask in this process, and then the healthy thing about this process is it's another lens to try to refine this and make it even better. And so we thank the boards for your engagement on this and the support that you give the staff on a day-to-day basis. I know there's, you know, some of this is a trust process. You trust that the professional staff are giving you a professional recommendation. The amount of hours that we spend on this, that if you would like to join us, it may take up weeks of your time. And so I know that, you know, there's always, where do I learn and engage, and how do I understand all of this? Your professionally paid staff are spending a lot of quality time trying to do that work on your behalf and bring you some policy recommendations. And so we thank you for your trust and respect in our recommendations, but we also know that they're just recommendations. You as the policymakers get to make those ultimate decisions, and we're here to help support you in that process. So I would suggest, Madam Chairman, that as we move into adjournment here today, that as we go through the budget process, hear from our citizens, let the school board have more time to dive into this. We will dive into this. That we will schedule a meeting after the budget process jointly again, or if there is a need as we see arise during the budget process, the school board's always been open to this meeting, that we would call that and then talk about the greater needs as well.
Any other business for the board? I would like to exert a little executive privilege here and give Chief Ferguson a moment. He has requested to address this group.
So good morning. I just would like to extend an invitation if any of you are in the courthouse area tonight. Our 2020 officers, both volunteer and career, are going to be sworn in tonight. Here in the boardroom, a small reception to follow. You're always welcome to continue with these events. Not as many officers as we had in previous years. A lot of officers continue to serve from last year into 2020. So I just want to extend that invitation.
What time?
Sorry, 6:30 tonight. 6:30 tonight. I think it probably will last maybe 30, 45 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, hearing no other business, this board will adjourn to Tuesday, February the 4th, meeting of the Board of Supervisors, Audit and Finance Committee at 1 p.m., open to the public. Tuesday, February the 4th, Board of Supervisors will attend the swearing in of the Deputy Fire Rescue Chief, Mike Watkins. I knew that was wrong. Board meeting room 250, open to the public. And also on the same day, February 4th, our 2 p.m. regular board meeting, and that is a change. We're changing to 2 p.m. for the afternoon and 6 p.m. for the evening meeting. So the Board of Supervisors is adjourned.
For our purposes, board members, I would accept a motion to adjourn until our meeting next Tuesday.
So moved.
Great. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now.